Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. In this series now, we're looking at, through culture, through worldview, the concept of origins. And that's what we began the series with the question of, is that of my interest in the origins as to the different models of origins and where they were coming from, how to discern the differences between those models. Like I had mentioned earlier, is that I had interest in the area because I believe it's a very important area to understand and to be able to decide and take a stand on. But I was not equipped to understand the differences between the different models of origins. And often it turned into a debate that then kind of declined into sarcasm and personal attacks. And so I was not interested in that aspect of the area, so I kind of left the field, or left the interest of investigating more into origins until I had to take another study for another degree, a Bolivian degree that required a lot of philosophy. And delving into that philosophy, I then realized what philosophy has to do with science and how we can use philosophy or worldview and the concept of worldview to understand the different scientific models. So that's what this series is on. This video lecture is on the origin of scientific models. And that's what we're going to get into in the next in the next minutes. So please stick with me as we apply what we've already learned through culture, worldview, and now applying it to the different models of origin to distinguish what the differences between them really are. What we have is put together the house. The house has been kind of our standard format to be able to understand the thinking pattern, the flow, and of philosophy and of the worldview concept. And so what we start with is, down below is the culture. The culture is ground zero, and the culture influences the whole structure of the house that follows. There's a lot of dynamics in culture, and we're going to go over some of them as to the Western culture versus the non-Western culture and how that influenced my teaching in my classroom and the comprehension. So in other words, there is a cultural influence in the thinking patterns. On top of the culture, then, one chooses a reliable source of knowledge. What is our reliable source? And we choose it consciously or subconsciously. We choose a source to follow, and out of that source then comes our basic beliefs. And from our basic beliefs, then that forms a system of thought, which is a philosophy or a worldview. And then the methods. What methods do we apply to get reliable knowledge out of the source we've chosen? Depends on the source. And then after we have the methods, then that comes to be a practice, and that practice is our scientific model. So our scientific model is built upon the culture, the prejudice, and the theory, as mentioned by Stephen Jay Gould in the quote that we have used to build this series off of. So this is the house, and what we're going to look at is 6 different concepts of models of origins, and based on basically just culture, ground zero, where are they coming from culturally, and 2, or number 1 in the foundation is, what is their chosen source of reliable knowledge. So those are the 2 main factors that we're going to consider in this video lecture series. So let's get on with choosing we start with the ground zero, and that's the culture. After the culture, we choose our reliable source of knowledge. In philosophy, there's recognized 4 basic sources of reliable knowledge, and that is intuitive knowledge. That means that I feel it. I know it's right. You can't explain it, you can't defend it, you just know it's right. That is one area. Number two is authoritarian knowledge, which means knowledge that is accepted by me from an outside authority. And that could be a person academically of authority, that could be a document, that could be revealed inspiration of Scripture, so it's an outside authority. Number three is logical authority, is that I believe in logical human processing of logical equations, I apply thinking, I apply human reason and logic to gain my source. It's my source of reliable knowledge. Number four would be empirical knowledge, which means I get my reliable knowledge from my five senses, from observation, from what happens out in the world of which I perceive out there. Now, these are four principal or primary sources of knowledge, and what we do is we pick one of them to be our primary source. And then on top of the primary source, or with the primary source, we may have a secondary source that will follow, but always following the primary source. The primary source will always be that which governs the whole process, but it may use secondary sources of knowledge within its functioning. Okay, we're talking about origins of scientific models. What models are we talking about? Well, what I have listed here is my list of 5 to 6 models that I know of. And actually, you probably might have heard of 5 of them, and the 6th one is my personal one that's been added because of looking over the different belief systems and of each one. So I've come up kind of with a 6th one. But anyway, number 1 is evolutionism. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to call all 6 of them an ism, just to make them even. And so that, because sometimes ism kind of has a negative concept, and so sometimes we call one just evolution and the others isms. And so what I'm going to do is just make the playing board or the playing field even. We're going with isms for all of them. Evolutionism. And under evolutionism, there are 2 currents, or 2 branches under evolutionism, and one of them is Darwinian evolutionism, and the second one is punctuated equilibrium evolutionism. Number 2 is theistic evolutionism. Number 3, intelligent design evolutionism. Number 4, old Earth creationism. Number 5, young Earth creationism. And number 6, a new one, creatorism. So those are the 6 models that we're going to evaluate just by ground zero and number 1, their foundation, their chosen source of reliable knowledge. And we're not going to get into the basic rules that come out of those that source of reliable knowledge, but what we're going to look at is just how to distinguish these 6 models just by those 2 factors. Ground zero, the cultural bias, and number 1 is the chosen source of reliable knowledge. Evolutionism. What is its cultural tendency? What is its ground zero? Well, it is Western. It is a Western cultural tendency because it starts with the divide of the natural and the supernatural. Now, those 2 domains are Western thought. And they were promoted by Thomas Aquinas in his thinking pattern or his thought processes. So natural, supernatural divide is a Western concept. And what has happened in evolutionism, in pure evolutionism, is they have dropped off the supernatural domain as not pertinent, is that it may exist, but it doesn't influence at all the natural domain and its functioning. So it's not even considered. It's considered that it doesn't really even exist. But so anyway, so it is Western. It is Western also in its cultural tendency because of its linear thought, because it's progressive upward thought, and because of its competitive nature, survival of the fittest. And so those are all concepts that come from a Western cultural thinking pattern. What would be the source of reliable knowledge? Number 1, it's human logic, human reason, but with a secondary of empirical knowledge. With that then comes, it's a closed system. Closed system meaning that there is never can be any interference in the system. Everything functions by natural laws. Everything is natural. Everything is natural elements, natural processes, natural conclusions. And so everything is a closed system with never any interference from any non-natural sources. We would call, or might be called, supernatural. There is no domain supernatural, so everything is natural. Everything is uniform, uniformitarian in its principles, in its causes, and in its effects. That is evolutionism, and that is the tendencies. Now let's get into the branches of evolutionism. The two branches of evolutionism. The first one is Darwinian evolutionism, and that's represented by Richard Dawkins. Darwinian evolutionism is an evolution that is slow, gradual, progressive, and onward and upward towards perfection. And that is Darwinian evolutionism. Number two is punctuated equilibrium evolutionism, represented by Stephen Jay Gould, the actual author and promoter of this punctuated equilibrium. And what does that mean? Well, it's similar to the Darwinian evolutionism. These are two different biologies, two different biologists. And Stephen Jay Gould believes in progressive upward motion, single file, Western type, but in stages. And it's that it maintains its static stage, its structure for maybe millions of years, the species or the animal, and then all of a sudden, boom, it changes its structure completely into almost another new structure. And so that is punctuated equilibrium, where the equilibrium continues static for long periods of time, and then boom, it suddenly changes into something else. And he cites the lack of fossil evidence for slow gradual changes. Well, then that was picked up by the creationists, saying evolution is in trouble because Stephen Jay Gould has now admits that there's no gradual changes in the fossil record. Well, what this series is trying to show is that we start with the rules and the hermeneutics, with the hermeneutical principles of interpretation, and that gives us our evidences. And so what this is about, it's not about that there's a lack of evidence, it's about a different way of interpreting the evidence. And so it's not that evolution is in trouble, it's that Stephen Jay Gould has a different perspective of interpreting it. And why does he have a different perspective? Well, the perspective he is promoting is a perspective that would be very similar to a Marxist politics. And so what he is promoting is not that we keep the same structure and make small modifications to it but we have to change the whole structure radically, revolutionary, and overnight. And so that is Marxism in politics applied to biology. Now, was Stephen Jay Gould a Marxist? He never claimed to be a Marxist, but there was a lot of Marxist friends and a lot of Marxism that likes his form of biology. So again, it's not because there's a lack of evidence, it's a different way of interpreting the evidence through a Marxist perspective, a Marxist worldview. So he would not, Richard Dawkins would try to be convincing Stephen Jay Gould of the Darwinian worldview, because Stephen Jay Gould holds a Marxist worldview type, even though I don't know if he ever said he was a Marxist, but his biology follows Marxist guidelines and Marxist principles. And so what we can just see is that science follows a worldview, a grid, how to interpret things by. And so this is evolutionary biology and two different biologists, two different currents. Theistic evolutionism, what is that? Well, it also has a cultural tendency, a Western tendency of natural, supernatural. But this evolutionism believes in the two domains, that there does exist a supernatural domain, but though that supernatural domain never interferes, overlaps, or enters the natural domain. Those are completely separate domains. And so what theistic evolutionism is to say that there will never be divine intervention in the natural world, the physical world. And so that you can believe in the natural world and work as a scientist in the natural world with a closed system always, but then believe that there is a supernatural entity outside of that world that never influences that world. That is theistic evolutionism, that would believe in God, but not a creator God, nor a God that inspired Scripture, nor a God that can do miracles today within the system. It's a God that is separate but out there. Source of reliable knowledge would be human logic and reason, and empirical. Closed system. Okay, I think that I had forgotten to do that on the previous evolutionism, is that its source also was reliable knowledge, was human logic, reason, and empirical. Okay, so it does use reason first and empiricism second, and so it has the same number 2 source of reliable knowledge as evolutionism. The only difference is in the cultural tendency, in that it maintains a natural, supernatural 2 domains separate. Moving on. Intelligent design evolutionism. Often we just hear intelligent design, but really it is a form of evolutionism because, well, we'll see, is that the cultural tendency involved in intelligent design is Western because of the natural, supernatural separation of the 2 domains. But what they do here is they do believe that there is a supernatural intervention in the natural domain one time at one point, and then it pulls back out and maintains its separate. And so therefore the evolutionists of closed system classify intelligent design evolutionism as creationism because intelligent design allows for one intervention and then a pullout. So what we have is cultural tendency, natural, supernatural domains, source of reliable knowledge, human logic and reason, with empiricism added, with empiricism subject to. And so they use a lot of mathematics, a lot of reasoning, a lot of logic, and that's applied to their system of proving design. And so that is their source of reliable knowledge, is human reason logic. Now, what about their system? Well, their system starts out as closed system. And then once it has evolved to a certain point, then there was intervention by some outside source that injected information necessary to create life in the area of biology. So then that injection, or that supernatural source that came in, is then pulled back out and the system is closed. So therefore we have a closed system, open system, and then closed. And after the injection of information, it became a closed system, and it remains closed from then on. And so in a closed system, you cannot have divine intervention. And so in this system, even though it be intelligent design of some intelligence, you can't have inspired Scripture because it's closed system. You can't have divinity. Jesus then was a moral teacher but could not be divine unless they reopen the system. And most intelligent design theorists do not reopen the system. It's closed, open, and then closed again. So if you can you can understand what's going on and discern the different systems, what do you believe in? Do you believe in a closed system with no existence of the supernatural domain? Do you believe in a closed system with a supernatural domain out there that never interferes? Do you believe in a closed system that the supernatural injected information one time and then pulled back out and closed it? And so you now and I can understand the different scientific models, and you can understand where they're coming from and which model you should adopt. Here's the evolutionary side usually accuses intelligent design of being a creationist model, and they don't like that because they are not a creationist model. But many churches and seminaries are confused also between the issue, because there's a lot of seminaries and churches that teach intelligent design instead of creationism. And so here is an answer to that debate by William Dembski. He wrote in his book, The Design Revolution, Answering the Toughest Questions About Intelligent Design by William Dembski. He says, intelligent design needs to be distinguished from creation science or scientific creationism. The most obvious difference is that scientific creationism has prior religious commitments, whereas intelligent design does not. Okay, what are the prior religious commitments? Well, they're in the foundation. What is your source of reliable knowledge? Creationism has as one of its sources is revelation. And intelligent design says we do not have that commitment. That's a religious commitment. Well, it is, but it's also a religious commitment to say that we don't accept divine revelation. And so that is a religious commitment also, to reject it. To accept it is religious. To reject it is also religious in either way. So what does he say further on? He says further on, scientific creationism is committed to two religious presuppositions and interprets the data of science to fit those presuppositions. Intelligent design, by contrast, has no prior religious commitments and interprets the data of science on generally accepted scientific principles. So what he says is that scientific creationism is committed to two religious presuppositions and interprets the data of science to fit those presuppositions. Here's the interpretation mode. What are the presuppositions? Again, it's the presuppositions are in the foundation of those glasses. So what are the presuppositions? They are the chosen source of reliable knowledge. The creationism includes revelation. That is one of their sources. And so does that make creationism religious because it chooses a source of authority as revealed Scripture? Okay, that would make it religious. Now, does it make intelligent design evolutionism not religious because it rejects the biblical revelation? I would say it's a religious stand just as well. So scientific creationism is committed to two religious presuppositions and interprets the data of science to fit those presuppositions. Intelligent design, by contrast, has no prior religious commitments and interprets the data of science on generally accepted scientific principles. What are those scientific principles? Well, they are in the glasses. They are one, logic, human reason, and empirically based, empiricism. Closed system from the beginning to the end. Uniformitarianism in its principles. That is the scientific principles of science today. So when William Dembski says they interpret the data on generally accepted scientific principles, it's philosophical naturalism based on a closed system, no miracles, ever. And so that's where intelligent design violates uniformitarianism by permitting an injection of information, and therefore it opens the system. If you have an open system at any point in the process, then you can't really extrapolate backwards nor forward, because it might open again. And what happened when it was open back there? Were there elements snuck in or made that would throw off all the dating methods and all the factors? So this kind of complicates it a little bit, but again, the glasses mean that all scientists are interpreting the data. And what goes into the interpretation of the data are their principles, are their belief system, is their source of reliable knowledge. He goes on, in particular, intelligent design does not depend on the biblical account of creation. The two presuppositions of scientific creationism are as follows. There exists a supernatural agent who creates and orders the world. Okay, so what he's saying is intelligent design does not believe in that. In other words, you can't have a supernatural agent that comes into the world that creates and orders the world. That is against intelligent design principles. And two, the biblical account of creation recorded in Genesis is scientifically correct. He's saying that is not true. So those are two assumptions that creationism assumes that intelligent design does not. So just by taking these two parameters, culture and the source of reliable knowledge, we can distinguish between the different systems pretty readily. So what we have, just going back to the lenses and Stephen Jay Gould's quote, what he had said, he says, first facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. Theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them. So those are two different scientific models, actually, of origins. Intelligent design, evolutionism, and creationism. They are not the same. They are very, very different in their origin and in their principles of how they interpret by. Number 4, Old Earth Creationism. Old Earth Creationism has the cultural tendency of being Western, again, because it also follows the natural supernatural divide and the chronos and the different time elements. So in other words, Old Earth Creationism is incorporating the chronos, the old time elements that have been gathered through a closed system, and applying it to the biblical record, the 6 days of creation. And so it's kind of a combination model that's trying to just adjust to the scientific data and the biblical data and trying to harmonize them. Source of reliable knowledge. What is their source? Well, they begin with human reason, human logic, because they take the scientific data as being accurate and from a closed system, and then they apply it empirically. They look, and then they apply it to revelation. So actually they're using 2 to 3 different sources of reliable knowledge, but in ascending order. Primary, number 1, is human reason, logic. Number 2 is empirical observation. Number 3, and a distant 3, is revelation, what was revealed. So it's kind of a 3-step with the hierarchy, with the primary being human reason. So what is their system? Well, their system is an open system where God created the first series. Then it closes, and it's closed for millions of years possibly. Then it's open again for God to create another series of species. Whenever there became a problem or a need, God intervened and created again. Then it was closed. Then it was closed for millions of years or whatever, and then it was open again. So in other words, it's an oscillating system. So what we have between the different models is a closed system permanently and forever. Then we have a closed system, open one time and then closed again, and now we have an open closed oscillating. So now you can see how the different models function. Young Earth Creationism, cultural tendency, is also Western, and because of its natural supernatural divide of the two domains. But what they do is they have a fluidity or a overlap between the natural and the supernatural domains. Now these are interlaced, and they are not separate domains, they're separate entities in the one domain. So what is the source of reliable knowledge? It's still human logic and reason is the number 1. Number 2, it is empirical, and number 3 is revelation. What kind of system is it? It's an open closed system. But there's fluidity between the two opening and being closed. Now, how do you have an open closed system at the same time with movement between it? Well, this is from a web page. This is one of the tenets creationist organization. They say processes today operate primarily within fixed natural laws. Okay, so that's natural laws, that's the natural supernatural divide, and relatively uniform process rates. But since these were themselves originally created, so there was an intervention in the original, the laws were originally created and are daily maintained. Okay, so now we have a daily intervention, or not intervention, but, well, it could be, I guess, because they use the term intervention. So it's a daily, the creator is there daily within the system, maintained by their creator. There is always the possibility of miraculous intervention, but to intervene is meaning that you're not in the middle of it. You are not, you have to intervene in the process. Okay, so there is some distinction between natural and supernatural. The miraculous intervention in these laws or processes by their creator. So there is a separation between them. He goes on. Evidences for such intervention should be scrutinized critically, however, because there must be clear and adequate reason for any such action on the part of the creator. Okay, so now reason is implemented because there must be clear and adequate reason for any such action on the part of the creator. I don't know whose reason is being applied here, if it's a human logic and reason or it's God's reason. But this seems to imply that it's man's reason that would be to justify why the creator intervened. So now you can see kind of how this is different from the old Earth creationism. It's different from theistic evolution, intelligent design, and what the differences are. What here is kind of mixed between natural, supernatural, that they are overlapping domains, but somehow they're separate still, and there's intervention. And if there is intervention, there must be a significant and clear, adequate reason for it. That brings me to mind probably of where I would stand, is that if creationism starts with creation and studies it through human reason to get to God, then I would be a creatorist, which a creatorist is cultural tendency, would be non-Western. It is not natural, supernatural. It's created, it's creator and the created, and there's fluidity between them. They are in the same domain. They are not locked, they're not bound. The creator is within the domain of what he created. Source of reliable knowledge would be external authority. The authority is external, is out there, and it would be through revelation, biblical revelation that was recorded in what we have today through the biblical record. Then a secondary and a third, tertiary, would be human logic and reason are applied, but as subjected to and under the biblical authority and the spirit of truth. So it's not dependent upon human reason to get to truth. It's that we must meditate, so this is the method, it's meditate upon the external authority and documents that have been revealed. And it's allowing them to work on me, not me working on them. So there is human reason, logic involved, but it's reasoning based in and following the lead of the spirit of truth. Empiricism, yes, but our empiricism does not dictate what exists in reality. Because of believing in the dimension of the spiritual world is a dimension that is not empirically detected. It can be oftentimes, and we can see the effect of the spiritual world on the physical world, but we cannot see directly God, because God is spirit. No man has ever seen him at any time. So it is an open system 24/7, consistently. So this is what I think I would identify myself more as now, a creatorist based on Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created. So you begin with God. as the creator, and then you look out at creation and how it reflects the divine nature of God, as Romans chapter 1 says. So it's not to study creation to get to God, it's to start with God and to see what God is like, to understand who God is through his word and through what has been created, through what he has created. So that is the two forms of revelation, which would be the specific revelation, which would be through God's word, and general revelation through what God has created. So those are the basic 6 different scientific models of origins, which you can now look at those scientific models and choose which model you are more in line with in your belief system. And so you don't have to just go out and, well, this one sounds good, and no, that one sounds even a little better. I'm convinced of this one because that's what Richard Dawkins wanted to convince me of, was the Darwinian worldview. But we must understand they all come and have a worldview. They all have a standpoint. They all have a source of reliable knowledge. They all have an open or closed system or an oscillating one. So that is what we need to understand, and how we can discern between the different scientific models. Well, again, thank you for accompanying me. This is kind of a wrap up on the sciences, on what scientific models. What's going to follow is the origins models, different origins, but based on the biblical record of the origins. So I hope that you continue in the series, and thank you for joining us. Again, we're Tim and Holly Nyquist, and you can contact us through those addresses. Again, thank you.